Hi, I'm Matt Jones. For the third straight week, Arkansas has the number one team in college baseball. On this week's podcast, we talk with Joe Healy of Baseball America, who was in Columbia for last week's games between Arkansas and South Carolina. We will also be joined by Chris Blair, the radio voice of LSU Baseball, to talk about the Tigers' big series win last week at Ole Miss and what to expect when the Razorbacks visit Baton Rouge this weekend. Seth Campbell joins me to talk all things Razorback baseball, but first, a word from our sponsor.
Massage Envy has been voted the best day spa and best massage in all of Northwest Arkansas. Great therapists and estheticians go along with a new service that I am truly excited about. Rapid Tension Relief uses a special tool that will melt the tension and soreness away. Trust me, you will not be disappointed in the results. I highly recommend this feature along with a total body stretch assisted stretch program. Whether you are competing at a high level or just want to relax, these services are for everyone. Massage, rapid tension relief, total body stretch, deep muscle treatment massage, you choose. Or you can try any combination of those. So the next time you're feeling tight, make sure to call my friends at Massage Envy.
This is the WholeHog Baseball Podcast, presented by Massage Envy, the only podcast devoted entirely to Arkansas baseball. Now, here's Matt Jones and Seth Campbell.
Arkansas remains the only SEC team that has not lost a series this year, conference or otherwise. The Razorbacks have won all of their weekend series going back to Southeast Missouri State in the last weekend of February. Of course, went undefeated at the College Baseball Showdown to begin the year against Texas and TCU and Texas Tech as well. They beat South Carolina last week, won 2 of 3 over the Gamecocks in Columbia. Before last week, South Carolina had only lost 2 games at their home park all year long. They expanded capacity before the Razorbacks came to town, allowed 3,350 to come to the games, and they were good atmospheres. Certainly not the best the Razorbacks have seen this year. Probably not any better than what they're going to see Friday night at LSU, but it was a good atmosphere, and Arkansas won at what has been a difficult place for visiting teams to win this year. For instance, Florida went to Columbia earlier in the season, and Florida was swept at South Carolina. So South Carolina has had some success at home this year, but Arkansas won 2 of 3 over the weekend, and the way Arkansas won was very impressive given the circumstances. It was the third straight weekend that Arkansas played a doubleheader on Game 2 of the South Carolina series, and because they had played a doubleheader the week before against Texas A&M, and because it had been a short turnaround to play at South Carolina, Arkansas played 6 SEC games over the course of 7 days. And so to win at South Carolina, that very impressive, I think, for Arkansas to go in there, win the series, improve to 32-7. They're 13-5 in the SEC, and they're tied with Vanderbilt atop the SEC standings. They've got a 2-game lead over Mississippi State in the SEC West. Seth Campbell and I will talk more about the South Carolina series in a little bit, but first I want to bring in someone who's actually there, Joe Healy of Baseball America. And Joe joins us now. Joe, we appreciate you taking some time for us today.
Absolutely, Matt. Happy to be here.
So you were in Columbia. It's your first time, I think, this year to see Arkansas in person. What were your what were your takeaways from the first time you saw them?
Yeah, first time I've seen them live this year. Obviously seen plenty of them online and streams and all that jazz. And of course, Teddy and I have spent a lot of time this season talking about Arkansas. They've been just incredibly fun to watch, and obviously they've been relevant. It's just a really complete team. That's kind of my takeaway. Early in the season, I feel like I spent a decent amount of time kind of poking, I don't want to say poking holes, maybe nitpicking a little bit with Arkansas's roster where, you look at the lineup and you're like, well, there's not a Heston Kjerstad here, right? And then like as time goes on, you realize that's a pretty unfair comparison. And the lineup has really kind of come along, I feel like. And then you can look at the pitching staff and you can say, well, there's no Isaiah Campbell here. There's no workhorse on Friday. And in college baseball, you know this as well as I do, Matt, the most typical way a team becomes a national title contender is you've got a real dude on Friday and you've got somebody dependable on Saturday. And then, maybe on Sunday you have to freelance a little bit on the pitching staff. But those first 2 days, you really want to have guys you can go out there and bet on 6, 7, 8 innings from. The Vanderbilt model, let's say this year with Rocker and Leiter. Mm-hmm. And Arkansas clearly is not that, and it's taken me a long time to come around to the fact that, that may not matter as much with this particular pitching staff. So as the season has gone on, I've liked them more and more, and I think it was a perfect series for me to be at in Columbia because that really hammered home how complete this team is, because they won a lot of different ways. They had a bullpen game when Dave Van Horn went into the weekend admitting more or less that, hey, we're going to have to, we played so many games in such a small window here. Like, we're really turning to guys who are just pretty fresh on that Thursday, and we're going to have to make do. And in the last couple of days, they get good starts and really kind of beat South Carolina at its own game. So I came out of the weekend thinking, man, this is really a team that can play whatever way you want to play and then beat you that way.
Yeah, and it's been that way all year. I mean, you think back to like the Texas Tech game on opening night. It's a 13-9 slugfest, or they've been in some 2-1 type games that they've won. It seems to me like Peyton Pallette and Patrick Wicklander are beginning to solidify number 1 and number 2 starter positions on this team, and that was really the question with them all season is, are their starters going to be able to go deep enough into games that the bullpen isn't just completely worn down by the end of the season? You saw both of them in person last Friday. What were your thoughts watching the two of them?
I think that's exactly right. The way you characterize it too is that they've kind of worked their way into those roles. I came away impressed with both, and they're kind of coming at it from different places, right? I mean, the question with Pallette is he's just young, and we get spoiled in college baseball by having some of these freshmen come on and really just light the world on fire, like right away, and I think that becomes a little bit of the expectation. And I don't think that's necessarily fair to some of these kids. And I think Pallette's an example of a guy he's clearly had his moments this year. This is not the first time we've seen him throw the ball well, but the stuff is so good. And it really does seem like he's coming along. And I think this is a guy who could be that real workhorse, whether it's next year or what have you, for Arkansas, to where now we look at their rotation a little bit differently than the way we looked at it coming in to this year. Wicklander's interesting because, this was not alien to him. What he did in the finale, I keep calling it the Sunday game because that's the way series usually work. It was weird that was Friday. But in that finale, like, he's done things like that before. And I was heartened by that from an Arkansas standpoint, because I think, if you want to say Pallette is the guy who has maybe the higher ceiling there, Wicklander's obviously, his stuff is plenty good. I don't want to disparage him in that way, but Pallette has the higher ceiling. Wicklander's kind of more of the steady veteran, if you will. But I don't quite know what to make of that start in particular, because while he was good, and I don't want to take anything away from what he did, because he did a really good job moving the fastball around, kind of giving South Carolina's hitters different looks. I also kind of came out of the weekend thinking that the South Carolina offense looks a little lost, and they had 2 big innings in that middle game that they won. But outside of that, I mean, Arkansas really carved him up. And it's one thing if it's Kevin Kopps, whose stuff was really on point, or Peyton Pallette, who, was throwing a 3,500 RPM breaking ball at you. Wicklander was really just beating him with fastballs, and it was a lot of first pitch swings on a fastball that was over the plate that just get popped up to first base. And that may not necessarily be sustainable, but I liked a lot of what I saw from Wicklander in terms of just absolutely relentlessly pounding the zone and moving the ball around.
Are we being too nitpicky with Arkansas? I mean, we talk about their flaws. The starting pitching hasn't gone deep enough into the games. There have been some issues with their middle relief. Offense comes and goes, but at the end of the day, they're 32-7, and what are they, 13-5 in the SEC? It seems from a record standpoint there aren't many teams that can compete with them. And then you even think about the teams that they played. I think they've beaten something like 7 or 8 top 15, top 20 type teams right now. I mean, is this an elite team? I
think so. I think the difference is, and I'm guilty of this too, I'm going to lump myself right in with this. I think we are a little bit guilty of nitpicking a little bit with this team. And I think part of it is it doesn't look like other elite teams we've seen in college baseball before. Like, it doesn't look necessarily like 2019 Vanderbilt, because 2019 Vanderbilt, for example, had, even if you put Rocker aside, because I think we only really knew exactly what Rocker was until he threw that no-hitter in the Super Regionals against Duke. But you looked at that lineup and you said, okay, well, J.J. Bleday is a top 5 pick. And that's the guy the offense revolves around. But there's also Austin Martin. And then that lineup is just so deep. And Arkansas's lineup is deep. But again, who does the lineup revolve around? I'm not saying it has to have a guy like that. However, you could maybe have you and I could have a debate about 3 or 4 guys maybe the lineup revolves around for Arkansas. So it just looks a little different. And then you go to the pitching, and there's the starting pitching issue, and it looks a little different than your typical national title contender. But I think the one thing that Arkansas fans should think about is that typically that's kind of stuff, especially on the mound, tends to matter less as the season goes on. Now, if you get to Omaha and you start, pick any pitcher, and he goes an inning and 2/3 and gives up 4 runs, and you have to go to the bullpen early, all of a sudden now people want to start asking questions, right? Because when you lose that way, it looks bad. It looks pretty rough. But consider this, if you get to a regional in Arkansas, barring a absolutely bizarre collapse, especially with the host getting announced early, like they're going to host. So you have to win basically 3 games in a regional, and Arkansas has more than enough pitching to do that. In super regionals, you just have to win 2 of 3. And then you get to Omaha, and because of the way the days off work, you can really, if you stay in the winner's bracket, which is no given, I understand that, you really only need your 2 or 3 best guys to start games for you, and you really just need to keep your 2 or 3 best relievers, Cops and whoever else you want to throw out there. You really just want to keep those guys rested as well as you can, and that's really all you need. Depth, if you're playing well in the postseason, depth is not really the way you're typically going to win national titles. Now, if you get into a loser's bracket situation, it taps your depth, but honestly, you know how it goes. If you get in the loser's bracket, you're probably not winning the national title anyway. That's just what history tells us. So I think this is an elite team. I think we just need to adjust the way we think about what an elite team looks like, whether you're talking about this year in particular, and also just college baseball in general, because much like at the big league level, the way the game is played is changing. And I think Arkansas is actually a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of they're just going to throw a ton of pitchers at you with different looks and different stuff. And they're just going to throw their best guys as often as you can. And that's just the way, kind of the way the game is going. And I think we need to kind of adjust to that, as opposed to waiting for Arkansas to kind of adjust to our expectations for what an elite team looks like.
Oregon State came out of the loser's bracket.
Yeah, of course.
Arkansas fans would love if that was a hard and fast rule. I think they may have come out of the losers bracket a couple of times that year in the regional and in Omaha.
Yeah, there are these. It's so funny I say that, and the most glaring example is one that runs counter to an Arkansas team. That's funny, but yeah. So there are certainly exceptions to that rule. But generally speaking, if you stay on the good side of the bracket, you're in good shape.
Kevin Kopps has been really good this year, and we're recording this before the baseball writers come out with their Stopper of the Year midseason watch list. And if he's not on that list, I would be absolutely shocked with the way that he's just shut everyone down this year. But I thought at South Carolina, that was probably the best he's looked this year. Pitched 5 innings, didn't allow a base runner, and struck out 12 of the 15 batters that he faced. And it wasn't just that he was striking them out; it's that he's so efficient as he's getting all these strikeouts. I mean, he only threw maybe 59 pitches over 5 innings in those 2 games.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, he. That's so funny you say that, because I had that thought after the games ended, that there was not a single competitive at bat against Kevin Kopps. There just wasn't. That's not an exaggeration. I mean, it was a lot of 3-pitch strikeouts. It was 0-2 hold, and then somebody rolls over on a ball, and it was incredibly impressive. And the thing about him is that he obviously has that cutter slider hybrid that he uses, that if depending on who you ask, they'll call it something different. But he just has such incredible command of that offering and knows exactly what he wants to do with it. And because it's not a 98-mile-an-hour fastball, or because it's not a big downer breaking ball that gets these really awkward swings and misses, like, it doesn't look dominant what he's doing. But then you look at the numbers at the end and you're like, well, that's what dominant looks like. So it's a story that I absolutely love when you consider that he's a 6th-year guy. He's had his struggles. He pretty publicly, I mean, you've written about just the fact that he was trying to be a pitcher. He wasn't necessarily at different points of his career, and has now gotten back to being the guy that he needs to be. And I think those stories are really cool, especially in a program like Arkansas, where or pick your elite program in college baseball, where the 6th-year guys or in usual years, 5th-year guys are really not typically the guys who are running the show. But, he's one of the more important guys for this Razorbacks team if they're going to win a national title. And he very well might be the best reliever in the country, quite honestly.
And amazing to think he's still got a year of eligibility remaining.
I know. Like, he's going to be a fascinating case. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not a big draft guy, so I couldn't really tell you, but I know Teddy and our Carlos Colazo, our draft writer at Baseball America, has been asked about what are his professional prospects. And like, it's hard to know exactly because there's just so many things. Like, the numbers are great and the stuff is clearly, gets hitters out, but he's a 6th-year guy, and there's just a lot of different factors pulling in different directions to determine what his ultimate pro baseball fate is going to be. And I'm just kind of fascinated by it.
We had a story this week. Norm DeBryan, who coached Arkansas for a long time, and he's been a scout for the Rockies ever since he retired about 20 years ago. He said he thinks that Cops could go pitch at the AA or AAA level right now.
Oh, I 100% believe it. Yeah, I mean, when you figure that he's got the kind of stuff that pitchers typically from the amateur level are having to be taught, right? Like, you have to, when amateur pitchers get into pro baseball, one of the most common things you have to work on is trying to figure out exactly, and then teach that pitcher exactly what type of pitcher they need to be successful. Because, so often these guys, this is not a great example for Arkansas, but you'll see mid-major pitchers who dominate mid-major or low major leagues with stuff that's good for that league, but is not good enough to get pro hitters out. And so they have to kind of change who they are as a pitcher. But, Cops is a guy who knows who he is, knows how he gets batters out. He's got incredible command. He's not going to try to do too much. Like, he clearly is not super caught up on exactly what his role is going to be. Like, he just wants to play and get outs and help the team win. All those cliches that we roll our eyes at, like, those are largely true for him. But yeah, I'm with you. I think that's kind of what makes it fascinating too, is he's such a mature arm and a mature pitcher that you could throw him at the high levels and he'd probably have success right away. I think he's right on about that.
Yeah, one more thought on Cops is that the hitting this year, I think, is better in college baseball, and of course it's better in the SEC because that's where the better hitters are going to play. And his numbers in the SEC have been outstanding this year. His numbers in the SEC have been better than his numbers were even in the non-conference. It's like he gets better as the season goes along. Before I let you go, Joe, just want to get your thoughts on the SEC race. Obviously, everyone feels like Arkansas and Vanderbilt are on some sort of collision course, whether it's in Hoover in a few weeks, or I guess maybe about a month from now, or if it's in Omaha a couple of months from now. Obviously, those are the two teams to beat in the SEC. You've got Mississippi State still there kind of lurking. Tennessee is a really interesting team, and Arkansas is going to see them here in a couple, 3 weeks. What are your thoughts about the SEC race as we've got 4 weeks left in the season?
I do think Arkansas and Vanderbilt have really separated themselves to a large degree. I think those are the two teams that are the most well-rounded, I think have the most going for them. I think those are the teams you look at for the national title. Behind them, I think you've got a lot of teams that I think are intriguing and maybe good, but not great teams. I think the best of which for me is Tennessee. I think they do a lot of things similar to the way Arkansas does them. Some of it is by choice. Some of it is not necessarily by choice. They too like to play around with their pitching a little bit. And part of that has been because of injuries, unfortunately for them. Less so than kind of just the way they decided to use their pitchers, but it's a really athletic offense. They're a team that kind of relies more on depth in the lineup as opposed to having one guy it all revolves around. But it's, a guy in Max Ferguson who's a really good athlete, Liam Spence. They've got probably 3 or 4 shortstops on the infield. Guys who could play shortstop. Jordan Beck in the outfield, who Tony Vitello, their coach, thinks could be a first rounder next year. So they're a team that if they kind of put it together, and it's funny that we say if they can put it together because they're 12-6 in the SEC and 32-10 overall, but they still feel like a team that's somehow kind of untested, and they're learning how to win in the SEC. Like, this is a program, let's not forget, that got to a regional in 2019 for the first time since 2005. So like this is a program that is kind of figuring out exactly how to win at the SEC level. And so I think it's a team that maybe uses that Vanderbilt series loss where they were close, but not really necessarily to winning that series as a little bit of a springboard. Mississippi State, I think you mentioned, and that's a good but not great team. The thing with Mississippi State is they also kind of try to win games in a lot of different ways. And the concern I have with them is I'm not exactly sure what you hang your hat on with South Carolina, because their offense is pretty good in spots. They've got a couple guys in Tanner Allen and Rowdy Jordan who have really productive players, been around forever. But then that's kind of it sometimes, and the offense really runs dry in a way greater than Arkansas has some inconsistency on offense, but Mississippi State is another order of magnitude more inconsistent than that. The starting pitching was supposed to be what they could hang their hat on, but not only are they not getting depth from their starters, they also have kind of started to not get as much quality from their starters. It's one, if you throw 5 and they're excellent innings, you're okay with that, but they're not really even getting that. And they've got their own guy in Landon Sims, who might be as good as Cops, a different pitcher, but might be as good. But the rest of the bullpen has kind of started to sag a little bit. So they're a team that as time has gone on, I think it's a team that could still get to Omaha. I'm starting to lose a little confidence in them as national title contenders. So I think it's, 1 and 2 in the SEC, Vanderbilt and Arkansas. I think you've got a group made up of Tennessee, Mississippi State I'd have next. And then, Florida, South Carolina, Ole Miss. I think those are all teams that are just really, really flawed. Good teams, I think, that'll play well in the postseason because the SEC is so good and is clearly this year the best conference in the country again. But I just don't think those teams are really anywhere close to those first two with Vandy and the Hogs.
And because we nitpicked Arkansas, Vanderbilt, just tell me if I'm wrong about this. Great number 1 and number 2 starting pitchers with Rocker and Leiter, but it seems to me like there's a significant drop-off in their Game 3 starter, and then their bullpen has not been as consistent as Vanderbilt's bullpen has been in the past.
Exactly right. Yeah, you've nailed it. They don't really know who their Sunday starter is. And I'm someone who will go on radio hits and podcast hits and say all the time, because, people tend to freak out a little bit about the third starter. Who's the Sunday guy? Mm-hmm. And I always tell people, the number of college baseball teams that feels really good about their Sunday guy is smaller than
very low.
Smaller than you think it is. And so I tend to downplay that a little bit, but you'd like to at least know who that is. And Vandy's had some injury issues, and also they're just kind of have struggled to find guys to give them consistent innings. And I think they're actually a team that is relatively, in a year when most teams are not young, they actually are a team that is relatively young because they were rebuilding coming off of 2019, going into 2020. And then, of course, we saw what happened in 2020. So it felt like they were still kind of retooling in 2020 and then never got to finish that process. And now they've kind of just been accelerated to a national title contender, and rightfully so, while also figuring out things on the fly a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the treacherous thing for them is that, let's say, Rocker and Leiter are excellent. Those two guys would be the number 1 on probably quite literally every other college baseball team. Mm-hmm. And if one of those guys has a bad day, all of a sudden now you're looking at that third guy, whoever that is, and looking to turn in a good start. And that's how Vanderbilt gets eliminated in the postseason, I think, is, Rocker Leiter has a bad day, and then you've got a toss-up game in the third one, and what do they have? Now, what I will say is they've still won most of those games. They've done a good job winning those toss-up games, but, in the postseason when everybody's good, obviously there's a lot more danger in that.
Yeah, like the Georgia series, that would be the recipe to beat Vanderbilt.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, they that series is kind of the blueprint when I think the rest of the college baseball world kind of looked up and said, okay, well that's what it looks like for sure. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, Joe, we'll leave it there. We appreciate your time, and I'll probably be giving you a call again when regionals roll around, because you know more about the teams that we don't know about than just about anybody else.
I appreciate that, Matt. Yeah, I'd be happy to do it. That's a real fun time of year to kind of help the rest of the world discover some of these teams that have flown a little under the radar.
Yeah, I knew you knew what you were talking about when you were able to give me about a 3-minute scouting report on Central Connecticut State a couple of years ago.
Yeah, that's my brand, and I will happily roll with that.
All right. Appreciate it, Joe.
Thanks, Matt.
All right. Have a good one. Joe Healy from Baseball America. We appreciate his time. When we come back, Seth Campbell will join me, and we will look back at the Razorbacks series against South Carolina. We'll also take a look ahead this week's series against LSU. Seth and I will talk about that. We'll also have Chris Blair, the voice of the Tigers, on a little bit later. This is the WholeHog Baseball Podcast presented by Massage Envy.
Massage Envy with clinics in Rogers and Fayetteville has been awarded Northwest Arkansas's Best Day Spa and Best Massage. One of the reasons is our care for athletes, both serious and recreational. We now offer rapid tension relief sessions using a high-caliber vibrating tool and total body stretch sessions like the ones used by the PGA. Both of these new services can be combined with the always popular deep muscle treatment. So whether you compete or just want to relax, there is no place better than Massage Envy.
WholeHogSports.com has the largest, most experienced staff of reporters covering sports in Arkansas. Football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, and more. You'll find it at WholeHogSports.com. The website includes up-to-minute news, daily commentaries, and award-winning photography from the staffs of Hogs Illustrated and the Democrat Gazette. For subscriptions, call 1-800-757-6277. That's 1-800-757-6277. Or visit us online today, WholeHogSports.com.
Welcome back to the Whole Hog Baseball Podcast, presented by Massage Envy.
You know, it seems that wherever Arkansas goes this year, that's where attendance will be increased, and that's going to be the case this weekend when the Razorbacks go to LSU. They are going to open capacity at Alex Box Stadium to 100% for the Razorbacks series there. Not only that series, but also LSU's final home series of the season. So I think 6 games is what this is going to affect, that they're going to open the attendance up. But that's a big deal, because that, in my opinion, when Alex Box is rocking, I don't think there is a better atmosphere in the SEC from a baseball standpoint. And, you know, I'd put it right up there with any park in the country. I've seen that crowd turn a lot of games just by their noise, by their, by the way they interact. And, certainly we've seen Arkansas blow some games down there when the crowd got into it in the late innings. And so their largest attendance this season has been 5,031, I think, for a March game against Mississippi State, a Saturday game in that series. When they open it up, the listed capacity at Alex Box Stadium is somewhere in the 10,500 range, but they have in the past packed that thing out to, in the 13,000 range. And so Arkansas has been in some stadiums, though, this year where they've played, hostile environments. It was that way against Ole Miss. They sold something like 33,000 tickets for the 3 games in Oxford a few weeks ago. That was a weekend record there. They went to Mississippi State. Mississippi State claimed that they let about 6,000 in, but Dave Van Horn said that it was about 12,000.
That's Mississippi math.
Yeah. So, and of course, they've gotten to the point where it's been packed out. They had over 34,000 people at Dudy Noble for the Mississippi State Ole Miss series, and I would guess that it was probably closer to 34,000 than 18,000 for the Arkansas series. I think even though the Louisiana Tech game, the Louisiana Tech series, the first 2 games of that series, that ballpark in Ruston was packed out. Where you go back to the college baseball showdown, there were 15,000 people in the park every time that Arkansas played one of those Big 12 teams early in the year. Even last week at South Carolina, they opened up their attendance more, almost doubled it for when Arkansas came in. And so Arkansas, they will sell tickets. We have found that out. And I'm talking about they'll sell tickets for the home team when the Razorbacks are the road team, and that's what happens when you're number one. And it's interesting. I think that's a dynamic that I think is certainly on everyone's mind as the Razorbacks go into Baton Rouge this weekend. And it's not just a baseball thing; it's university wide. Any outdoor venue at LSU is going to be 100% capacity moving forward. And it's interesting from an Arkansas standpoint because Bob Holt wrote in the newspaper this week, it's not just the baseball team going to Baton Rouge this weekend. The softball team's going to Baton Rouge. I think Paul Boyd, who covers the softball team, he told me that they have not won a series in Baton Rouge since 2005, and they've lost something like 19 of their last 20 games there, or maybe 17 in a row. And the track and field teams are going to be in Baton Rouge this weekend. So if you are a Razorback fan, of all sports, you're going to be your eyes are going to be on Baton Rouge this weekend.
Yeah, you're going to be going down to southern Louisiana, and you're going to, as you said, have your eyes all over Baton Rouge for sure.
Get some hot boudin, some cold kush. You know that.
I have been to Baton Rouge once. I went and watched. It was a terrible game. Arkansas play LSU when they played at 11 a.m.
Is this football?
This is football.
Okay.
So it would have been not the last time when Arkansas went with KJ Jefferson and he started, but the time before that.
That would have been one of Brett Bielema's last games.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I went down there. So, what do you hear about LSU fans all the time is how terrible they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we were walking around the stadium, and these guys actually offered us breakfast
because it was an 11 a.m. game, so it was like 9 a.m. And I was like, I don't know. I'm pretty skeptical. And so, but they're like, just come on. So I went, and I was like, if I die, I die in Baton Rouge. You know,
what did they have for breakfast?
Shrimp and grits.
Yeah.
It was fantastic.
Yeah, I figured it was something like that.
It was great. They had the breakfast sandwiches on the side, and I had one of those. But like the guy even says like, you can have a breakfast sandwich, that's fine. But if you're coming to our tailgate, you have to have this. And it was like Cajun shrimp and grits, and it was good. I
think the best atmosphere I've ever been a part of was in 2007 when Arkansas beat LSU at Tiger Stadium in Death Valley. That was an incredible atmosphere. Anytime you can go down there at night for any kind, I mean, the football games get the focus and for good reason how good they are at their stadium. But anytime you can go there for a night game baseball too, it's an incredible experience. And Arkansas is going to play a couple of night games there this weekend, weather permitting. Again, they're looking at possible rain and possible double headers this weekend. And wouldn't that be something if Arkansas had to play 4 consecutive double headers?
Didn't it seem like, I don't know, it was just a few weeks ago before all of these doubleheaders, obviously, that Van Horn said, we haven't really had to have any of these things, been tested and faced a little bit of adversity when we have to go into doubleheader. And, you'd almost like to do that before you get to the postseason. Yeah. Well, he's done it now, and you might have to do 4 in a row.
Well, I mean, it gets you ready for the postseason because you think about a regional. If you get into the loser's bracket, you have to play a doubleheader to get out of the loser's bracket. Think back to 2017 when Arkansas beat Missouri State in that 3 a.m. game. What people don't remember is that Arkansas had to beat ORU earlier that day in an elimination game to get back to playing Missouri State. And the ORU game was delayed by rain, and they started it late. And then so the Missouri State game didn't start until 9 o'clock, and you had the rain delay in the middle of that. And, of course, everybody remembers how that game finished. But, yeah, you have to – I think it's a good thing to not just play a doubleheader, but play the 9-inning doubleheaders like they've been fortunate enough to do. LSU played South Carolina in a doubleheader 2 weeks ago, but it was a 7-inning doubleheader because it was the final day of the series. And so Arkansas has been fortunate that they haven't played a doubleheader on day 3 in any of these series, and so they played 9-inning doubleheaders. And I think that gets you ready for later in the season, be it a regional type setting. It could be something in Hoover. If you get pushed into the late game in Hoover and there's some rain or there's some delays earlier, we've seen times where teams will have to go out and play in the morning, and they'll have to come back and play that night. And so, I think these doubleheaders can really help you. The doubleheaders, that was the focus when they went into South Carolina last week, because Arkansas had played the doubleheader against Texas A&M the week before, and South Carolina had played a doubleheader at LSU, like we said, the week before, but there were 7-inning games, and the South Carolina-LSU series began on Thursday, so it ended on Saturday. The Arkansas A&M series didn't end until Sunday. So basically, you had an instance where in the same amount of time, Arkansas's pitchers had thrown 28 innings, where South Carolina's pitchers had thrown 14 innings. And South Carolina's pitchers had a day longer to rest going into the series. And then, of course, they had to play a doubleheader. By the time they finished Friday night, it was their 6th SEC game in 7 days. And in those 6 games, they went 4-2 against A&M and South Carolina. A&M's not a great team this year, and I think South Carolina I think they're a good team. I don't know how good they are. They kind of seem to me like they're right there on the edge of maybe being a regional host, maybe being a 2 seed somewhere. But still, that's a good win to go to South Carolina. And like I mentioned at the start of the show, South Carolina had not lost a series. I don't think they'd lost a series at home this year. They had only lost 2 games at home all season. And so to go in there and win those games, win them in the manner in which they did, I thought, given all the circumstances, it was maybe as dominant a performance as Arkansas has had in the SEC outside of the Mississippi State series.
Yeah, I think when you put everything together, you can't say that it isn't. It was really eye-opening for me to watch them play on Thursday and just come out and look like the number 1 team in the nation. They didn't hit the ball and score like 20 runs or anything, but they came out, they did what they were supposed to do. They had Bolden on the mound. They filled in after him. One of the big plays of the game, I thought, it's been a minute since Thursday, Matt, but I believe it was Kostu came in and got the ground ball double play to end that inning. In the first game on Thursday, it was like the 4th or 5th inning. That was cost you, right?
I think it was Caden Monk.
Monk. Okay.
Yeah.
It may have been Monk. That's right.
Yeah, Monk came in with runners on, I think, first and second with no outs, and he got out of it
Okay.
maybe with I think there was a failed bunt back to the pitcher's mound, and then he got the double play.
Yeah, that was huge. Like that's the kind of situations that you need to know that you can work yourself in and out of, that you need to know, hey, I've gotten these reps before in this type of game that I know I can do this. And Arkansas, to respond to that adversity, to know that they're not going to have their normal Friday night guy throw on the first game of the series, and just to respond in that way was huge. And then what you've seen from Wicklander moving forward and Paulette and these guys, I think that their best days are ahead of them, which is encouraging for the Razorbacks and kind of scary for everybody else.
I think pitchers tend to pitch better as it gets warmer outside. I think that they tend to go longer into games, and you're seeing that a little bit right now from Wicklander and Paulette. And we talked with Joe Healy about this earlier. The Game 3 indecision, that's really not the right word, the just the unknown of who you're going to start in Game 3 and what a Game 3 is going to look like from a pitching perspective. It's everywhere. It's at most schools. You're not going to find very many teams that have, like Arkansas did in 2018, where they had Blaine Knight and Casey Murphy and Isaiah Campbell. And I know Campbell was a wild card that season because he was so up and down. But you don't have a whole lot of teams that have 3 really established, polished starters like the Razorbacks had that season. Typically, it's more like what we're seeing right now from Arkansas and from Vanderbilt and from LSU this weekend. LSU, they've got A.J. Labus and they have Landon Marceau. Those are their Game 1 and 2 starter. They lost Jaden Hill to a Tommy John surgery. They didn't name a Game 3 starter for their series at Ole Miss, and I don't know if they'll name a Game 3 starter for their series at Arkansas this week. We'll ask Chris Blair about that here in a little bit. But I think what you saw in the first game of the South Carolina series, so that Thursday game where Caleb Bolden pitched 3 1/3 innings, and then you had Ryan Costu and Caden Monk and Kevin Kopps, and they all kind of piggybacked on top of what each other did, and they had a 2-hitter. Not to say they're going to have 2 hitters on Sunday. That's not very likely. But I think that's going to be how you see Arkansas attack Game 3 against LSU and moving forward. I think that you're going to see it be an instant, and it's really been that way most of the season anyway. I mean, I think that they've been happy if they can get Lyle Lockhart into the 5th inning, and then they can, use their bullpen. But you think about last week against South Carolina. If you can continue to get consistent outings out of Wicklander in Game 1, out of Paulette in Game 2, think about all the pitchers who didn't throw in Columbia last week.
Yeah.
They could have played 2 more games with the pitching that they didn't use in Columbia. They struggled there over the final couple of innings of the second game, but otherwise they were incredible on the mound. And I think Wicklander is really kind of coming into his own. I wrote about the health scare that he had last summer. I think that everything that goes into I think what he's done is that he has kind of learned a lot about himself and what makes him work from a physical standpoint. And I think you're really starting to see that this season. He had a couple of shaky outings early in the season, but really since that 5 1/3 inning of relief against Alabama, he's been very consistent for them in most of his. They've all been starts. Went 7 innings last week against South Carolina. Only gave up 2 hits and 1 run. It was on a 2-out, 2-strike home run that Carolina got in the middle innings. Paulette's been really good. He went 6 innings against Texas A&M, didn't give up a run, went 5 1/3, 5 2/3, I think, against South Carolina, and really didn't run into any trouble until that final inning when I think he got squeezed on maybe a couple of pitches, caused some walks, and then that inning just kind of fell apart for him and the relievers who came in. But I think that Wicklander and Paulette they've found something with those two. They've found consistency in games 1 and 2. They may struggle. They may not go 5 1/3 or 7 innings in all their outings. In fact, it's hard to believe that a pitcher would go consistently 7 innings. But I think they've found something, and I think that this team has really turned the corner since they left Oxford, and Van Horn challenged his starters to give them more innings. That's been the case the last 2 weeks. I think they got 41 outs, 41 of 84 outs against Texas A&M over those 28 innings. And then when they went to South Carolina last week, I think they upped it to something like 47 or 48 outs during 3 games. And so, if you can continue to maybe increase that a little bit more, then you feel really good about what your starting pitching is giving you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's been the question mark, right, for this team all year long has been, well, can you continue to utilize the bullpen the way you've been if your starting pitching is not going to give you the innings that you expect out of a starter? If this if this starting staff starts to go deep into games, if they can eat up innings into the 6th inning and the 7th inning, then all of a sudden Arkansas's bullpen looks in fantastic shape. There's not an opportunity to where if you get a guy that goes 7, that in 8 and 9 you're not going to bring in Kevin Kopps to seal a game if you're ahead in that game, and then you can apparently bring in Kopps again. He seems to have a rubber arm, so you can see him possibly 2 out of 3 games. And when you think about in a regional setting, that means that you can win that all important first game if you need to bring Kopps in there, or if you have to play multiple games, you can throw Kopps in those. And then, as you mentioned, Matt, the pitchers that didn't pitch against South Carolina, Connor Nolan's back and healthy. We haven't seen him on the mound in forever. You got Lyle Lockhart, who was your Sunday starter that didn't pitch in South Carolina because Bolden threw on Thursday is what they went with. You've got Bolden, Vermillion. There's tons of weapons. Jackson Wiggins didn't get on the mound against South Carolina. There's weapons all of a sudden. You think about, well, I'm really scared about the usage of the bullpen in the innings that they are, and that can be a concern. But if the starting pitching starts to go as deep as they can, that concern may even turn into a strength, which is so weird to say. But when you only have to start throwing 3 or 4 guys out of the pen, and the order that you can go into, you start turning into that 2018 team that all of a sudden that you're going to go from the starter to one guy to the next, and you're going to get to Cronin at the end, and he's going to close the door. And then that 2018 team, they had some success with that kind of formula. So that's, as I said, that could turn something that maybe was a weakness into something that could possibly be a strength for the number 1 team in the nation.
And then in the last game against South Carolina, they didn't even need a setup man to get to Kevin Kopps. They went straight from Wicklander to Kopps, 7 innings for Wicklander, 2 for Kopps. You mentioned Kopps got a rubber arm. I don't know if it's so much that as it is that he's efficient when he's pitching. I think he's only thrown something like 3.9 pitches per at bat. And he's striking out. But it's not just, typically when you see a high strikeout guy, you see them throwing a lot of pitches.
That's valid.
He's thrown 3.9 pitches at bat. That means that he's striking out most guys in 4 pitches, and a lot of times in 3 pitches. That's what it was like against South Carolina. What he throw 34 pitches in the first outing over 3 innings, and I think maybe 25 pitches over the final 2 innings in the last outing. I thought Matt Hobbs made a really good point this week. I was listening to him do an interview with somebody, and he said that Kopps is one of the rare pitchers in the SEC who can get ahead of you with the same pitch that he can wipe you out with. And, that cutter's been so good. And I can't think of a pitch. I can't think of an Arkansas pitcher who has had the success that he's had with one pitch in a season. You think about Matt Cronin's fastball, really great pitch. You think about, we'll just stop there. I don't know if I want to go too far back and start trying to remember all these, but I just can't remember a pitch that's been that effective for one person. I thought it was hilarious listening to the South Carolina broadcast during the finale. The color analyst was just beside himself that the pitchers or that the hitters weren't just sitting on that cutter, slider, whatever you want to call it. Going back to Hobbs, I was listening to something with him this week. He said, some people want to call it, Kevin calls it a cutter. Some people want to call it a slider. He said, you can call it Steve for all I care. It just works for him. And, but the South Carolina analyst, he was beside himself that they weren't sitting on that pitch. You can't. There was a great, the pitching ninja, and I hope we get him on our show before the end of the year. He tweets about Kevin Kopps about 5 or 6 times a weekend, but he had this really, really good video where it was a pitching overlay of his 2-seam fastball and the cutter. And it was really not until maybe the final 10 feet that pitch broke. And so it looks like the exact same pitch. It's the exact same release point. And I don't know if you're a hitter, what do you do? Because if you sit on one, you have to, you run the chance of being struck out by the other. But then I think part of what makes Cops so good too, Seth, is the situations in which they bring him in. They bring him in either when the game is tied or Arkansas has the lead, and typically in a tight game. And so what happens in those situations is the opposing hitters start getting a little bit desperate. They're desperate to produce something, toward the end of the games. And that pitch is not one you want to face when you're a desperate hitter.
No, I think that the pitching ninja overlay is the exact reason why you can't sit on that. If you want to take it, so you say, all right, I'm just not going to swing because this is a wipeout slider curve cutter. He's just going to embarrass you by throwing a fastball at 90-something miles an hour right down the middle of the plate, and you're going to get called strike three. You can't adjust. Baseball, you have less than a second anyway from when the pitcher releases the ball to when it hits the catcher's glove to make a decision. And in that split decision, you got to go. I mean, let's just be super generous here, Matt, which I kind of agree with you. I don't think that his ball breaks until the last 10, 15 feet. But even if you cut it in half.
I think Brady Allen, the South Carolina leadoff hitter, said he thought it was about the last 5 feet.
So even if you cut that in half to 30 feet, because it's 60 feet, 6 inches, you're going to tell me that a regular reaction time to baseball is like 0.8 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to tell me that the 0.4 seconds you have to decide whether or not that pitch is going to break out of the zone or in? You can't do that. I'm going to go out and say that's physically impossible, humanly impossible. So what he is doing to make that pitch look like a two-seamer is amazing. And, there may be some teams out there that are just going to be like, all right, we're just not going to swing. And we're going to have to force him and get him into counts. Well, then he's just going to come back with the fastball.
Yeah, he's got 3 or 4 pitches that he can throw in the strike zone.
And I've noticed, too, he'll start pitchers out or hitters out and with like a curve ball. Or it's probably a slider more than a curve. But he has a breaking ball in there as well that's not the cutter that he can throw. And he can throw that for strikes. I have not been doing this very long, covering baseball. I've watched Arkansas baseball since I was little. I've not seen a performance in a few weeks put together like what Kevin Kopps has done.
The only thing I can think of that's comparable to it was what Campbell did toward the end of the 2019 season, beginning somewhere around maybe the Texas A&M series. He was just lights out. I mean, you think about it, he went to Georgia. Or went to the SEC tournament, and they played Georgia, and I think he might have gone into the 8th inning of that game. He had outstanding games in the postseason against TCU, against Ole Miss. A lot of people forget, I think he went into the 8th inning against Florida State up in Omaha, and so he was outstanding. But that's about the only stretch that I can think of, in at least in recent memory, of a pitcher who's been thrown as well as Kopps has been here lately. Aaron Fitt from D1 Baseball, who we've had on our show several times in the past, he was on the Razorback Daily podcast with Matt Zimmerman and Quinn Grovey, and he made a statement recently that he thought Arkansas had the best offense and the best defense in college baseball. Defensively, I don't know that you can really dispute that. I mean, you think about the plays that Battles and Moore make up the middle. Even think back to the South Carolina game 1, first inning, South Carolina loads the bases against Caleb Bolden. And Brady Slavens made an incredible stop on a ball that took a funny hop over his head and got him out of that bases loaded jam. You've seen Christian Franklin made a lot of great plays in center field. I think you're seeing Caden Wallace become a better defensive right fielder. He's making a lot of really nice plays. I think about a diving catch that he made in the foul ground, I think against South Carolina. Braden Webb, when he's playing defense in left field, I think he's as good as there is. And so defensively, I don't know that you can really dispute that. Offensively, it seems like a really odd statement to make when you've got a team that's batting .280 and, their leading hitter is hitting .325 in Matt Goodhart. In SEC play, I don't know that they've got maybe 2 guys hitting over .300 in conference-only games. Caden Wallace has hit really well in conference-only. I think he's hitting something like .338 in SEC play, and then Brady Slavens is hovering somewhere right around 300. But what I think makes this lineup so good, and we've talked about this before, Seth, is you have to look past the batting average, and you have to look at the fact that they get on base. I mean, you can't find very many innings where Arkansas doesn't have at least one guy on base. They're doing a really good job of taking their walks this year. I think they lead college baseball in walks this season. Through 39 games, they've taken 240 walks, and rough math says that's about 6 walks a game. They're being hit by a lot of pitches. I think these guys are crowding the plate maybe more than I've ever seen them crowd the plate before. They've been hit by 50 pitches this year. That's over one hit batter per game, and so they're getting on base in a lot of different ways. I mean, 6 walks, 1 hit batter a game. That's 7 base runners before you even take into consideration what you get in base hits. And so, but what they're doing a good job of is they're getting a guy on. Maybe you walk a guy, maybe you hit a guy, 3-run home run. Walk a guy, hit a guy, double, scores a couple of runs, and they're creating some big innings through that. And so I don't know if I would say they're the best offense in the country, but certainly with the way that they can drive the ball and hit doubles and triples and home runs, I think they're one of the most dangerous offenses in the country because of what they can do leading up to those at bats. And you're seeing some guys like Slavens and Goodhart here of late who are really doing a good job of driving runners in once they get them on base.
Yeah, they do lead the NCAA in walks at 240, which is 4 ahead of TCU, and TCU's played an extra game.
And that's uncommon for a team that's hit as many home runs as Arkansas's hit. I mean, it goes back to like what we were talking about Cops. When you have a pitcher who throws a lot of strikes or gets a lot of strikeouts, a lot of times they have to throw a lot of pitches to get those strikeouts. Same thing with hitting home runs. A lot of times when you hit a lot of home runs, you have a high strikeout total, which this team does have a high strikeout total. They've struck out 350 times in 39 games, but you don't see a team that hits home runs be real patient a lot, and that makes this team a little bit different. They're leading the nation in home runs by quite a bit. They've got 74 home runs, and they also lead the nation in walks, and that's very rare. I feel like when you see that.
Yeah, I agree, Matt. The thing too, if you notice, ESPN doesn't do this every time. It just kind of depends what lower third they throw up. But they've started this year, I've noticed in the MLB as well, instead of just listing batting average on the stats that they throw up, they've done OPS, which is on base plus slugging.
Yep.
And that, I think, isn't a more appropriate stat for this Razorback team. If you're going to draw a lot of walks and if you're going to hit home runs, batting average is not the stat that you want to look at. So this is diving in a little bit to the statistics of baseball, but that is how the game has changed in the past 15 years. And that's, 4 bases are worth more than 1. And Arkansas's OPS, I don't have it in front of me. It's not a stat that the NCAA keeps up with, but that is the stat that you want to look at. So whenever you're looking at, if they throw Christian Franklin up when he's batting, look at his OPS and see what that is. And I'll look it up in a second, but I think like the MLB average is like around 750. So
For a team or for a player?
For a player.
Okay. For Arkansas as a team, their OPS is 910.
Wow.
Yeah. 505 slugging, 405 on base.
Wow.
Yeah. And for, say like for Matt Goodhart right now, his OPS would be 1074.
Holy smokes.
Yeah.
The MLB average last year, well, technically they didn't do 2020. They just kept 2019 since it was only a shortened season in 20. In 2019, the MLB average OPS was 758.
Yeah. 18
was 728. So you're hovering around the 750 range if for a normal team.
Yeah. Yeah, you can get caught up looking at batting average, but you dive into the sabermetrics.
Yes.
And you can, you find some interesting things about this baseball team. All right, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk with Chris Blair. He's the voice of the LSU Tigers on the LSU Radio Network. He will help us preview the Razorbacks series against the Tigers, that and more when we come back on the WholeHog Baseball Podcast presented by Massage Envy.
Massage Envy with clinics in Rogers and Fayetteville has been awarded Northwest Arkansas's Best Day Spa and Best Massage. One of the reasons is our care for athletes, both serious and recreational. We now offer rapid tension relief sessions using a high-caliber vibrating tool and total body stretch sessions like the ones used by the PGA. Both of these new services can be combined with the always popular deep muscle treatment. So whether you compete or just want to relax, there is no place better than Massage Envy. Want more coverage of your home team? Download the WholeHog Sports Video on Demand app. Check out the Fan Zone and get up-to-the-minute videos, podcasts, and features on football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, and more. Search for WholeHog Sports on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire at home. And take it with you on the go by downloading it for your mobile device in your app store. The WholeHog Sports Video on Demand app. Get it today. Welcome back to the WholeHog Baseball Podcast. Let's take a look at the week ahead, presented by Grease Pig.
When the baseball schedule comes out every year, there are certain series that you look forward to and mark on your calendar. When are they going to play them? I think Ole Miss and Mississippi State have become those types of series for Arkansas, and certainly LSU is as well. The Razorbacks play the Tigers 3 games this weekend in Baton Rouge. Scheduled game times are Friday at 6 p.m. on SEC Network, Saturday at 6:30 p.m. on SEC Network Plus, and Sunday at 2 p.m. on SEC Network Plus. There is some weather, surprise, surprise, that could potentially alter this series. Wouldn't that be something if Arkansas had to play a 4th doubleheader in as many weekends? And that's certainly looking like it could be the case, although the rain chances in Baton Rouge this week are not nearly as good as they were over the past few weeks when they had rainouts in Game 1 of the Ole Miss and Texas A&M series and in the final day of the scheduled series against South Carolina last week. The week ahead is brought to you by the Grease Pig. For 20 years, they have specialized in serving UA students, faculty, and staff with 2 locations in Fayetteville on College Avenue and MLK Boulevard. The Grease Pig has experience for all your repair needs and, of course, complete service oil changes, staffed with ASE-certified master technicians. They also provide tires and alignment services at their location on College Avenue. The Grease Pig, it's all about taking care of you, and a proud sponsor of the week ahead. On the phone line now, we have LSU play-by-play man Chris Blair. And Chris, we appreciate you taking some time to talk with us about this weekend's big series between the Tigers and the Razorbacks.
No problem. Good to join you, man. Looking forward to what I think will be another great series and a long-standing rivalry between these two teams.
Yeah, you know, it's kind of weird. We've seen so many times when LSU has come to Fayetteville as number 1, number 2 ranked team, and it's kind of it's been turned on its ear a little bit. It's a different feel this year, having Arkansas number 1 coming to Baton Rouge. I wonder, just kind of, can you paint the picture for us? What's the excitement level there as LSU is getting ready to host the number 1 team?
Oh, as we get ready to, I think the number one thing goes to the anticipation that the capacity restrictions will be taken off this weekend for the first time since, before the SEC began last year when the season was shut down. So I think, even though it's been a very up and down year, LSU, I think, would be the first to admit they've let a few games slip away. They've lost a handful of conference games by 2 runs or less. But all of that's kind of forgotten from the fan base because I think there's just this excitement that, number one, anybody who wants to come to the box is going to be able to come if they buy a ticket, and you're going to have the type of atmosphere that people are accustomed to. It's been a different place at 50% capacity this season. Even a big crowd just isn't what it used to be. So, the fact that number 1 Arkansas is coming in, the fact that, over the years, these two teams have had some really exciting and memorable series, and the fact that, we could see a full box Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I think right now, as opposed to 2 weeks ago or even last week, I think the excitement level really for the first time this year is about to kick in.
We've seen this from Arkansas. They're allowing, somewhere in the 6,500 range at Von Walker Stadium this year. But, even at that's a great crowd for just about any college baseball fan base. But you get into the teams that are in the SEC West, there's a different expectation there, and obviously great home field advantage that those teams. It's felt different in Fayetteville this year. How different has it felt up to this point, having the crowds minimized?
Well, it's radically different. It's just it kind of reminds you of what college baseball is, for good or bad, or for whatever reason. I mean, that's just the way it is across most of the country. It's just different in the SEC, based on the tradition, based on the programs, based on the success. And, last week LSU took 2 out of 3 from Ole Miss and Oxford. And of course, Mississippi had already taken the restrictions off. So you had 11, 12, and almost 13,000 people there, each game. And that was the first time since really 2019 in an SEC setting that it felt like SEC baseball. So it has been radically different. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. And, I think from all of us that, I think from the field crew to the ushers, to the ticket takers, to the broadcast, everybody that's going to be at the box to get that experience, hopefully on Friday night, is going to be a welcomed return.
Let's talk about that Ole Miss series for a second. How do you balance the joy of winning the series with the disappointment of how Game 3 ended?
You got to take it level-headed. I mean, it's 3 games. You get an opportunity to win 3 games in conference play, and every game for LSU at this point, because of the hole they dug early on against very good competition, you have to take it that way. So even though it's disappointing Saturday that you leave to go back to Baton Rouge having, a 9-1 lead, just collapse and lose on a walk-off 10-9, fact of the matter is, if they had won Thursday night, had lost in Ole Miss on Friday night, and won on Saturday, you still win 2 of 3, and you're probably feeling really good coming back. It's just the way, that's how baseball is. But, it was a successful business trip. There's no 2 ways around it. I mean, LSU went up there. A lot of people didn't give them a chance to win a single game, much less win the series. And I think maybe because of the fashion of Game 3, to have an 8-run lead late and just watch it, just dwindle away probably makes it a little tougher. But I think the coaching staff and the team had to look at it from, hey, look, we had 3 game opportunities. We had a chance to win all 3. Could have been worse. We got 2 out of 3. And so I think that's kind of the approach they've taken. The sad part is that probably Saturday's game, for the most part, was probably the best game they played up until, the pitching and the wheels fell off. In the first game, they hit the ball well. They had 11 hits on the night, but had trouble getting the clutch hits to drive runners in. They had base runners on all night long. Eventually, they get the 2-run homer from freshman Dylan Cruz, and that's enough to win the game 5-4. Similar story on Friday night. They got the leadoff man aboard in 8 out of 9 innings. And yet had a 2-1 lead going into the top of the 9th when Gavin Dugas hits a grand slam, gives them some separation. They add another run, and they win 7-2. On Saturday, they came out swinging, and not only were getting men on early, but getting them around and getting them in. So, again, I think it's a successful trip against some really good pitching in a hostile environment. And again, LSU's going to have 4 to 5 true freshmen in their lineup, and a handful of sophomores that did not play SEC action last year. So to go into Oxford for the first time in their collegiate careers and face a true hostile environment, I thought the guys did pretty well. I give them a thumbs up.
I watched LSU as much as I could early in the conference season, those big series against Mississippi State and Vanderbilt and Tennessee, and I watched a couple of the games against Ole Miss last week, and it looked like a much different team to me. How much have they grown up in the last month?
I think they've had to. I think they were thrown into the deep end right out of the gate. LSU has the toughest strength of schedule in all of the country, which I think is the reason their RPI is up at, I think, 23, even with their conference record. But I think, after the Kentucky series in Lexington, again, where they won the first 2 games and came up short in Game 3, it was kind of the feeling maybe they had turned the corner. And then they had the complete meltdown in the Saturday doubleheader against South Carolina after beating the Gamecocks pretty solidly on Thursday night in Game 1. And then you thought, well, maybe they didn't turn the corner. So then you go to Ole Miss, and as I mentioned, I don't think there were a lot of people thought they would pull out 1 victory, much less 2. Did they turn the corner? The freshmen this season have been, kind of the most consistent. It's been some of the veterans that have just been a little surprising as to their inconsistency in 2021. But, if you get, the difference between LSU against Tennessee, against Mississippi State, and against Vanderbilt was you had really full threats in the lineup at the plate. I think they've extended that really over the last 3 conference weekends, where now you're looking at 7 threats in the lineup. And as you well know, that makes all the difference in the world. So we'll have to wait and see. I mean, Arkansas is, as advertised, number 1 in the country, and they certainly deserve it. They've got danger hitters up and down their lineup, and they also have some big power arms. So It's going to be another knockdown drag out. And, LSU on paper, I think, is the overwhelming underdog. But at this point of the season, that's probably the best place for them to be.
Jaden Hill is an Arkansas kid from Ashdown. Of course, was injured earlier this season. He's not pitching anymore. Taking him out of that role on the weekend, how much has that affected their pitching staff, and how much does things look different now since he's gone out?
Well, it's been just tremendous, the loss of Jaden Hill. I think looking back on it now, Jaden probably would have been better suited for the Game 2 guy on the weekend, and it's something that both Coach Paul Maneri and pitching coach Alan Dunn have talked about. Not that it would have prevented the injury by any stretch. It's just that Landon Marceau really has consistently been the ace pitcher of the staff, and it was almost like there was so much pressure on Jaden Hill to go out there and max effort 96, 97 miles an hour to start a game, where, again, he was a guy that was still learning how to be a starter. I mean, it's easier. Not easy, but it's easier to come out of the bullpen and be asked to close a game, maybe go 2 innings and go max effort. Again, you have to learn how to pace yourself. It's something we saw Zach Hess go through a couple of seasons ago after having a fantastic start to his career out of the bullpen. But losing Jaden Hill, you really had 3 veteran pitchers, and you had Landon Marceau, you had A.J. Labus, and you had Jaden Hill. So suddenly one of your weekend starters is put on the shelf. And the good news is surgery went well out in Los Angeles, and it looks like his career is going to continue, and we're excited about that, down the road at the next level. But, take any team and suddenly take away their weekend starter, much less their Game 1 starter. And then the rest of the pitching staff is highly talented. The problem is they're all freshmen. And, sometimes they come out there and look like they're ready for the moment. And sometimes they come out there and they look like freshmen. I mean, that's part of the development of the college game, especially at this level with the type of hitters and teams you're going to face. So, to take him out of the mix, it's kind of put LSU, even after they started to improve play in all phases of the game, suddenly now they got to find a Game 3 starter. And to this point, after 3 weekends, they haven't found him.
Landon Marceau started Game 1 at Ole Miss. A.J. Labus started Game 2. Is that the plan again this week? And then what's the plan with Game 3?
It's the first time talking to Coach Maneri on Monday night. He and I get together each week, and he told me then. He said, it may be a situation where Landon goes on Friday, and they possibly have A.J. move to the Game 3 spot, and then try to find that starter for Game 2, and more than likely it would have to be mismatched, put together just from the bullpen, which is what they tried to do really against Kentucky, and what they tried to do against South Carolina, and what they tried to do last week against Ole Miss. So that wouldn't totally shock me, but I think it's all going to be predicated on what happens Friday night with Landon Marceau. I think that's a possibility for Coach Dunn and Coach Maneri, and I'm sure they're looking at all the analysis on that right now as we speak. But my guess is, they won't make that final decision on whether AJ goes on Saturday or Sunday until we see how Friday night goes.
I was reading a story the other day that was quoting Paul Maneri, and he said it's kind of funny, but one of the things they tell their players is the first goal is to make Hoover. And right now, if the season were to end today, I think LSU would get in. I think they're 11th out of the 14 teams, and only 12 get to go to Hoover. I wonder, though, how much do you think that's a goal at this point? Is it just making Hoover and then trying to figure things out from there?
I think that's, always a goal. It's interesting because a lot of people, as time moves on, people will say, well, the SEC tournament doesn't mean as much as it did 10 years ago or 15 years ago. The same can be said for the basketball tournament as well. But there are some coaches who still, that's a goal in mind. And I know for a fact that, LSU always sets out, their goals every year is ultimately to end in Omaha winning a national title. And then following behind that is a number 1 seed. Behind that is hosting a regional. Behind that is winning the SEC regular season and tournament. So, I think that in this given year, it's easy to pick that goal out and say, yeah, that must be what they're putting on the locker room. Hey, we got to get to Hoover. But the truth is that's something they say every year because the SEC tournament still means a lot to Coach Maneri, and getting a chance to win either the regular season or the tournament title is something they take a lot of pride in. But to your point, you and I and fans can look at it in realistic terms, and I think that is true. I think right now it's coming down to we don't have any chance to even get an opportunity to play in the NCAA tournament. That is, even go on the road in the regional. And we all know, look at Coastal Carolina. They came to Baton Rouge on the road and eventually won the national championship. But to get to play in a regional, you got to get to Hoover. And then you probably at that point have to win several games and maybe get to the semis or the championship game, which LSU certainly accustomed to doing. So I think that's why it's important now, because you have no hope of anything if you can't get into the SEC tournament, considering 12 out of 14 teams are the only ones that go. So, yeah, is it a goal? It always is a goal. Is it a big-time goal right now? Every game, taking it one game at a time, you betcha.
You mentioned the freshmen, Dylan Crew and Trey Morgan look like they're kind of the anchors of the offense, if you will. They're batting .362 and .358 going into this series, and they've started every game. How good have they been, and what do they mean to the lineup?
I've talked to a number of former Tiger players, those that played for Paul and those that played for the great Skip Bertman. And they all, when they mention Trey Morgan or Dylan Cruz, they simply say, we're watching a major league player in a college uniform. And their consistency shows that. We've all seen some really talented freshmen come into the league, have a great start, then hit SEC pitching or SEC games, and suddenly, there's a little dip. The great ones don't dip too deep, but there's a little dip. And, considering the fact that Trey is somewhere around 360 and Dylan Cruz is somewhere at 350 on the season, and then what they provide to you. I mean, Trey Morgan is a first baseman that could be playing in the major leagues right now. He makes plays that covers up a lot of the deficiencies defensively for LSU, just because we have some other younger guys either playing on the infield or playing in a different position that they've ever played before. But Morgan covers that up just with the way he plays and the use of his glove and his acrobatics and his stretching ability. I mean, he's just amazing to watch. And then Dylan Cruz is as solid as it gets in right field. I mean, when the ball goes in the air, if Gio DiGiacomo, the center fielder, isn't tracking it down, then Dylan's going to make the play. So it's fun for me to watch those two guys play, because I think in years past, there's no chance we're watching them playing college baseball.
All right. Well, Chris, we appreciate your time.
No problem. I appreciate it, man. Looking forward to a great series.
Chris Blair, the radio voice of LSU baseball. Again, Arkansas plays LSU 3 times this weekend. The game times as they are right now, and like we mentioned, these could change based on the weather. There's something with like a 30 to 60% chance of rain every day that Arkansas is scheduled to play down in Baton Rouge this weekend. But as of now, the game times are 6 o'clock Friday, 6:30 on Saturday, and 2 o'clock on Sunday. Friday's game is going to be on SEC Network. Clay Matvick and Chris Burke are going to have the call on SEC Network, and then Saturday and Sunday's games will be on SEC Network Plus. And I can tell you, LSU's home announcer, everybody's home announcers have an element of homerism to them, but LSU's aren't as bad as South Carolina's. And I don't know that anybody's are as bad as South Carolina's were, especially during that last game.
I ended up muting them. I muted them and listened to Phil Elson. I couldn't do it. I just thought that there was like an innate bias. Like you said, there's a bit of homerism in everybody, but I feel like for a decent part, Brett Dolan and Troy Eklund, I just blanked on Troy's name. They do a pretty decent job of being in the middle, riding the hog side of the line, right? But those South Carolina guys, it was just like it's blatant almost in a way, and so I just turned them down and listened to Phil.
It's what you would expect from a radio broadcast.
Yeah.
I feel like, radio broadcast, you don't have a lot of visitors, or the visiting team's fans listening to your radio broadcast. On the TV broadcast, because, the way the SEC network agreement is, when Arkansas goes to LSU and Lynn Rollins is calling the game, he's calling the game for Arkansas just as much as he's calling the game for LSU. And so you're right, there is an element of bias there, because a lot of times these are former players who, not necessarily doing the play-by-play. I can't think of a whole lot of players who do play-by-play, but there are a lot of former players who are doing the analysis on the SEC Network Plus broadcast, the same way with Troy Eklund, on the Razorbacks broadcast. But I think you're right. I think they do a nice job of at least, trying to ride the middle as much as they can. That was tough. Listen to the South Carolina broadcast. That was as tough as I've had.
But not as bad as Flow Sports.
Well,
from a perspective, you actually got to see the game.
Well, you got to see the game, yeah. From an announce standpoint, I think that Pat Combs, who was on Flow Sports, for me, he's as good of an analyst, as there is. Maybe anywhere. I mean, I really think that Pat Combs does a really nice job, and so that was one of the advantages to that Flow Sports setup when they played in Arlington earlier this season. It felt like listening to a cheerleader. It really did. Toward the end of it, I mean, it was like, okay, we only need 4 runs. I think we're going to come back in this game. Well, that didn't happen.
Yeah,
or there was the great moment when who hit the home run? Was it Wallace in the middle inning, something like the 5th inning? If he throws a changeup over the middle here, I'll love it. Or a changeup over the middle, and Wallace hits it out of the ballpark,
deposited into left field.
Yeah. So
Matt, this Saturday game, Razorbacks Friday night, they're opening up 100% attendance. Friday night, you get a night game in Baton Rouge, and then Saturday, so think about this. This is going to be the first time that LSU fans get to tailgate since 2020 when they won the national championship in football.
In New Orleans, yeah.
So you might want to watch out. There might be a party breaking out.
They may not even make it into the stadium.
Oh yeah, I almost guarantee you there's going to be some people that don't. But that is going to be an environment. They're going to have a freaking blast. Can you imagine being a student there? That's you got to celebrate a national championship, and then you haven't gotten to do anything since. Really, I mean, you can still go to games and stuff, but it's just not the same. It's going to be a party in Baton Rouge.
One more thought on Alex Box. This weekend reminds me a little bit of when the basketball team went to Rupp Arena a few months ago, in that Kentucky basketball this year was not what you are accustomed to seeing from Kentucky. The same thing with LSU baseball. But when you go into Rupp Arena, you just expect that it's going to be a dogfight, and more often than not, you're not going to win that game. And the same, I think the same holds true for LSU baseball at Alex Box Stadium. They've been so good there that you just kind of wonder whether or not a team is going to. You don't expect a team to go in there and win. You hope they can win. You think that Arkansas on paper is going to be favored to win this series, but until they actually do it, they've lost 7 in a row, 7 series in a row in Baton Rouge. They haven't won a series down there since 2004 at the old Box Stadium. And so I don't know, LSU baseball, it's Kentucky basketball, it's Alabama football, it's Arkansas track and field, South Carolina women's basketball. Those programs win so often and so frequently that until you beat them, you don't necessarily expect to beat them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's what that kind of feels like as Arkansas goes into Box Stadium this weekend. But I think that they have shown they can go on the road and they can win. I wrote this this week. They won in Starkville for the first time since 2010. They won in Oxford for the first time since 2010. They won at South Carolina for the first time since 2013. Now, they haven't had as many opportunities to go over in South Carolina and win. But this has been a team that has, said, hey, I understand, what the streaks are, what the history is, but we're not playing history. We're playing in the present. And they've done a nice job of that. And I think they've got a good chance to go in and win at LSU this weekend. For as much as we have talked up Alex Box Stadium, they are 2-7 at home this year in SEC games. Now, they played good teams. They lost 2 of 3 to Mississippi State. They lost 2 of 3 to South Carolina, and they were swept by Vanderbilt. But this is a team that has struggled at home a lot against quality teams, and they even lost a home series to Oral Roberts earlier this year. And so there's I like Arkansas's chances this weekend, but like I said, because of the history at the box, you just kind of until they actually pull it out, you wonder whether or not they're going to be able to.
Yeah, my key to the game, Matt, is to keep all entries to the field closed so wildlife cannot wander onto the playing surface. So we don't have a possum reference. And that team, that was back in, I remember watching the game in 2016 because Arkansas just wasn't very good, but for whatever reason, they played well that game until halfway through until the Possum came on the field.
Yeah. I mean, that team played well in a lot of games toward the end of the year. You remember they almost beat A&M in a series. And A&M was a national top 8 seed, I believe, that season. And they let A&M get off the hook in like the 8th inning of the second game when they were about to win that series. And I think that was loss number 1 of 13 in a row to end the season. And so they played, well at times toward the end of the 16th season. But Arkansas is going to be trying to snap a 17-year losing streak.
Been since 2004.
2004. It was Dave Van Horn's second team, his first College World Series team.
Think about all the teams Van Horn has had since then. And he
that,
gets an opportunity every other year to go down there.
That was that 04 team. They were picked to finish 11th out of 12 teams in the SEC. And I think LSU was picked to win the league or picked to win the division at least. And they went there and they swept the series in 2004. And it was like the second, maybe third weekend of the SEC season. And that's when people kind of stepped back and took note of, hey, this could be a really good baseball team. And that Arkansas team actually went on and won the SEC. They split the regular season championship with Georgia, and really one of the great kind of worst to first type deal. Even though they had not finished, they had not been the worst team the year before. They had been picked to finish 11th in the SEC, and they finished first that year.
Yeah, so many opportunities. It's kind of crazy that they haven't won since 2004. It's going to be a great atmosphere, though. And, this, as you said, this Razorback team has broken a lot of streaks from the other team. And so I don't think that they're going to be intimidated by Alex Box by any stretch of the imagination.
One more thought on LSU. This is finals week at LSU. And I have always been of the belief that teams that are coming off finals do not play well. Think back to a lot of the Arkansas basketball team. A lot of people ask, why does Arkansas basketball never play well in North Little Rock? A lot of times that game in North Little Rock is put on the Saturday at the end of finals week. Or you think back to last season, they played Oral Roberts at Bud Walton Arena on December the 20th, I believe it was. That was the Saturday or the Friday at the end of finals week. And I've seen a lot of Arkansas baseball teams struggle at the end of finals week. That's typically Mother's Day weekend, the senior day or the senior weekend at Baum Stadium. And we've seen them struggle a lot of times in that. So this is the end of finals week for LSU, and it'll be interesting to see whether or not that plays a role. And then on the flip side, when Arkansas plays Georgia next week in Fayetteville, that's going to be the end of finals week for the Razorbacks. I know finals are a little bit different this year with the way classes are and everything, but finals are still finals. It's still a stressful week for the players when they're leading up to that series. So like we said, Arkansas plays Georgia next week. We will be back next Thursday to recap the LSU series and to preview that series against Georgia. Visit us at WholeHogSports.com. Throughout the weekend, we'll have lots of coverage from the Razorbacks' 3 games in Baton Rouge. For Seth Campbell, I'm Matt Jones. We appreciate you joining us on the WholeHog Baseball Podcast presented by Massage Envy.
The proceeding has been a production of WholeHogSports.com. Look for our latest podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast store. And visit us anytime at WholeHogSports.com for the latest news and commentary.